I'm your host, Dennis Horvitz, the David Letterman of the Hopelessly Damned. We're actually doing, for the first time in a long time, a studio show. Usually we tape guests who give presentations at our brunches and or at our monthly meetings. And by the way, you can find out about our brunches and regular monthly meetings by utilizing the information on your screen. And I think this is, we're kind of just on the verge of, we're on the cusp of spring. Actually, we're taping this on St. Patrick's Day. So all of you atheist saints out there, top of the morning to you. And in any case, it's been a while since we've actually done a studio show, and it's also been a while since we've actually had as a guest one of our own members. So I would like to introduce Howard Rothman. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dennis.
Howard is a professor of biology at CUNY. Is that correct? And specializing in mostly in human physiology.
Yes, CUNY is the City University of New York.
City University of New York, and he also happens to be a member of New York City Atheists. And Howard has some interesting comments he wants to discuss today for your edification and mine as well. Who wrote the Bible? And there have been many people who have actually kind of had their different hypotheses about who wrote the Bible, and
Yeah.
I guess we're going to hear yours, and I will try to ask some questions along the way, and
Please
hopefully not be irritating.
No, not at all.
That I'm not always.
Be as forthright as you need to be.
Okay, all right. So, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Most people who are believers, if you ask them who wrote the Bible, will give you an instant, I would say, knee-jerk reflex and say, God wrote the Bible. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't take too much questioning and probing from that point on to honestly reveal an acute case of confusion on that part when you just throw a few simple questions their way. Like, for example, if you talk about the books of the Bible, in the Old Testament, for example, if you say, well, there's the 5 books of Moses that are the first books of the Bible, and if God wrote the Bible, then why are they called the 5 books of Moses? Didn't Moses have a hand in this? And the answer from at least more religiously informed individuals usually is, well, God dictated the Bible to the 5 books to Moses, or inspired him to write whatever he wrote, and that explains it. And then if you ask them about the other books of the Bible that seem to have also a very allegedly well-known authorship, let's say the Song of Solomon, who wrote that? And then they become a little bit more reasonable and usually say, well, Solomon probably wrote that, but perhaps inspired by God. And further on, if you ask them things like, well, who wrote the Psalms? They'll typically have some knowledge of David allegedly having written the Psalms, and again offer the same thought that the various books of the Bible that bear the names of particular authors or particularly prominent people from big biblical times were probably written by those particular individuals under the inspiration of God. And
that's the general layman's position.
I would say probably an intelligent layman's position. I would say probably they might recall from Sunday school or some kind of religious training having heard something to that effect. And there are many people, though, who claim to be intensely religious, and if you just start to probe any part of their belief about the authorship of the Bible, they'll just scream at you, God wrote the Bible, and that's all I know, and I really don't want to continue this discussion. Mm-hmm. And but I would say the situation comes to rest, at least with intelligent laymen, that the various alleged authors, the people who have their names attached to books of the Bible, are the actual authors, but with divine inspiration guiding their hand as they wrote whatever they wrote. And at the same time, if we take a look at the New Testament, we find that the New Testament has somewhat different content that tends to yield, it's not a guide to the perplexed, it's a cause of perplexation, if you will. And that is that as the New Testament opens up, you're offered four different views of the events surrounding the life and crucifixion of Jesus, and those are obviously the four Gospels. There's really, in essence, a fifth Gospel, which Paul wrote, called the Acts, which largely describes the same material.
Right. Well, I had actually heard that all told, that there may be as many as 37 different Gospels, and the people that somebody decided, was it Ignatius?
No,
Ignatius Loyola.
Okay, yes.
I think it was Ignatius Loyola who decided on the final four, I think.
No.
Right, he's coming to that. I'm sorry.
Loyola came much later. He was
Okay.
a 16th century figure. It was Saint Jerome. Saint Jerome was
Yeah, I'm
appointed.
sorry. I'll shut up. I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. Around 380 A.D., it was noticed by the Roman emperors that the people of Rome who were interested in the new religion that was forced on them from above, from the emperor Constantine himself, starting Constantine got the idea of Christianizing the Roman Empire in 313 A.D., but he didn't actually adopt this very specific, detailed, structured religion that he did until 325 A.D.
And it was probably an entirely political decision on his part. Don't you think?
It was not only political but economic. And,
Right.
and
But what I'm trying to say is that I don't think there's evidence that he ever actually set foot in a church himself.
You're quite right with respect to Constantine. He never became a Christian.
Is that true?
He never became a Christian until he was on his deathbed, and that was in 337 A.D. And the reason why he never became a Christian was that he said he had a lot of killing to do in his life, and that would keep him from going from heaven.
Right. I remember reading that.
And so he really decided to postpone his decision to become a Christian until the very last moment of his life, when he really knew he wouldn't have any opportunity to kill anybody else and to get himself into trouble with God. So that was the point a few minutes before his death when he became a Christian. Now, with respect to going back to the Gospels, though, which I was touching on a moment ago, the Gospels are books that, if you carefully examine them, it's not very difficult to discern profound disagreements between them.
Oh, right.
And if not profound disagreements, at least profound differences in emphasis in whatever they consider to be of importance to a practicing Christian. And the question is, why would God, if he wrote the Bible, inspire 4 or perhaps 5 different writers to have views of the same events that were substantially different from each other? And it leads one to wonder, can you really conclude it's kind of silly to talk about God writing the Bible when clearly so many people have their names on documents, but B, can you even seriously hold on to the belief that God inspired all the people whose names are attached to documents that are in the Bible if the documents clearly offer disparate views of the events? Is God, the only thing you might conclude is that God may literally be trying to confuse his reading public. And there have been theologians who have actually made the specific assertion that if God wants to do that, who are you to question him? This is a prerogative of God, and he may have his reasons to do this. And
Right.
You're not to question such a thing.
The God works in mysterious ways, that bailout that's been used for
Yes.
thousands of years, literally.
Yes, yes. And the book of Job in the Bible is a living example of that. That's the issue, that's the book that directly tackles the issue of, in a world that seems so chaotic with the people who are allegedly the good, trying to do good, and are also religious and trying to be observant in whatever they think is their proper religion to observe, and only trying as hard as they can to lead a proper good life. Why, very often they have to suffer the worst of experiences in this life, and often people that are just outrageous scoundrels seem to enjoy a very good life. And
Well, I think that's would you say that that was kind of part of the larger question of theodicy itself?
it is.
Yeah, let me just, for those of
Yeah.
you who don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but theodicy is basically a part of religious philosophy that attempts to reconcile evil in a world that's supposedly created by a good and benevolent God.
Exactly. But of all the books of the Bible that attempts to deal with this question, Job is the absolute authority on this.
Yes.
I wouldn't, perhaps authority is not the best word. A better
Example?
word may be an example of dealing with this question.
Yeah.
And and of course, the book of Job is clearly not a book written by Job.
No.
The authorship of Job is, I should say, from the standpoint of those theologians who have literally tried to study the authorship of the books of the Bible. The authorship of the book of Job is by far the most puzzling, more than any of the others. It's very difficult to date the book of Job.
But it's certainly pre-Hebrew.
Pre-Hebrew, I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean.
Well, in other words, it's not the story of Job is not didn't have its origins amongst the Hebrews. It was actually something that the Hebrews, the proto-Israelites, kind of adopted.
That is certainly one hypothesis,
Yeah,
and the reason for that is that the book of Job, unlike almost all of the other books of the Old Testament and several of the New Testament, never mentions the Kohanim, the religious priesthood.
Right.
And it would be unthinkable, well, to the thinking of some people, it would be unthinkable that a book that dealt with the most essential tenets of the faith, why believe in a God in a world that is so full of evil, that would appear to almost negate the idea that a God could have made the world. Why would you create a book that deals with such a subject and never mentions the most holy religious authorities in the Jewish religion? Mm-hmm. And it tends to suggest the only possible answer could be the book must have been written before these holy Jewish authorities even existed.
Right.
And dealt with the same question. But of course, then it would suggest that maybe the book did not come from the Hebrews, because there's very little to suggest that the ancient Israelites were any sort of literary people prior to the era of Moses. Moses seems to be the first author who put forth a written version of what Israelites, or later the Jews, are supposed to believe. So we're left with the question that Job, as a book of the Bible, is the most mysterious one, and it's very hard to figure out who wrote that one. We can only offer intelligent hypotheses as to when the book might have arisen. I myself, with respect to Job, have an entirely different theory.
Go ahead. Yes.
My theory is that the book was written during the Babylonian exile, at a time when the power of the Kohanim was almost totally broken as a result of the destruction of the first temple, and that during that era, the Kohanim, depending upon where you looked in Babylon, some of the Kohanim seemed to maintain a following, but other Jews during that period tended to have the feeling that their religion had been proven demonstrably false, and they seriously looked into the religions of the Babylonians, and shortly thereafter the religions of the Persians who conquered the Babylonians, and there is much that came into the Jewish religion from the contact with them in that period.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, as a matter of fact, typically the idea in the Jewish religion that there is such a thing as a devil.
I was just going to discuss that. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you. It's one of the more prominent places, one of the few places I think where Satan is strongly mentioned, isn't it? I think he's alluded to elsewhere.
Exactly.
But in the book of Job is
Yes.
He's definitely a player. He's a definite main character.
Exactly. And with respect to the contact with the Persians in that particular era, the Persians the Persians were primarily of a religion that had two deities, a god of light and a god of darkness. And the Persians in their religion had no difficulty explaining the reason for evil in the world. In the Persian religion, there was a god of darkness and evil who went around doing his business, so to speak, messing up whatever the god of light tried to do. And the god of light was really not invincible or was not invincible and in control of the god of darkness,
right,
as is the case in the book of Job. In the book of Job, the devil seems to be, for want of a better term, a necessary evil for God to do whatever work he wants to do, and he basically reports to God and takes his orders from God. Whereas in the Persian religion that the Jews were exposed to in the later phase of the Babylonian captivity, they came into contact with the Persian religion and were quite influenced by it, so much so that the prophet Isaiah in his book specifically addresses the Persian belief and says, no, if you're a good Jew, you don't believe what they believe, that there is a separate god of darkness. There is only one God, and he works in mysterious ways that you perhaps are just not privy to knowing, and you must just accept that.
I think if you could make a generalization about all of the prophets in the Old Testament, and certainly many of the early church fathers, is that basically spent all their time trying to keep their ducks in a row, trying to keep people from straying.
Oh yes, yes.
But I know that in the book of Job, it's almost like there's a point where God and Satan are almost like drinking buddies because they're making a wager. And I think the Jewish version of Satan, Satan was more of a prosecuting angel. He wasn't against God. He was acting on, as you said, acting on God's orders.
Yes.
Whereas the Christian version and a Muslim and I think other versions, he's actually trying to fight against God. But that's not how he's portrayed in the book of Job.
Exactly. Yes.
Right.
The Jewish concept of Satan is that Satan is basically a proxy to do God's dirty work.
Yeah.
And the entire book of Job is meant to address this question as to why evil exists in the world. What I would like to come back to, though, is, since the focus of my talk today is who wrote the Bible, I'd like to address some of the books of the Bible that are also puzzling as to their authorship. Mm-hmm. One of the things that theologians started to notice in the 19th century, when they were pretty free to actually sit back and study the precise content of the Bible, both in translated forms and in untranslated forms, one of the things that they were free to do at that point without finding their head on a platter, as had been the case in earlier times, was to literally cast doubt upon some of the content and authorship of what they were reading in the Bible. And one of the first things that were noticed in the theological scholarly literature was that there were places especially in the Old Testament, where there were what are called couplets.
Oh, yes.
And couplets are passages that seem to say the same thing or deal with the same issue twice. You'll read one passage at a point, and then half a page later you'll read another passage, and it deals with the same material, and it very often is at least slightly different, if not considerably different. One example that I like to throw at people who seem to feel that the Bible is completely free of contradictions, and once you never even mention that, is if you read Genesis and read about
Yes.
Noah and his collecting animals for the ark. And if you ask most people who really have not read the Bible very carefully, even though they may advocate it very strongly, ask them, how many animals did Noah take onto the ark? Or how did he go about collecting them? And they'll always tell you he took them in pairs, male and female, one pair of each and everything on the face of the earth. And I'll ask them, are you sure that that's what it says? And they'll, oh, yes. Well, if you go down about half a page in any translation of the Old Testament that you care to read, you'll find that it subsequently says that Noah took pairs of most of the animals of the earth, except for the kosher ones. Mm-hmm. And the kosher ones, he took 7 of each.
Right.
So that when the entire voyage on the ark was ended, God could be thanked by making sacrifices from the kosher ones, and people could eat the kosher meat from
Right.
these animals. So there's very clearly a subset of animals on the ark that number 7 pairs each. And honestly, I have found almost every advocate of the Bible who claims to be a religious person absolutely amazed when I tell them about 7 pairs of animals, and I literally have to reach for the Bible and open up to the correct spot and show them the couplet that says, number 1, that affirms what they always thought, and then take them a few lines down and show them that there's something that strongly contradicts what they always thought, right there in the Bible on the same page.
Right. Well, isn't there supposed to be, actually, even dealing with the creation myth itself, there's actually 2 versions of the creation
Oh,
myth.
absolutely, yes.
And I think the second version was actually written before the first version.
I'm not sure what you mean there, I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, in the order in which they appear in Genesis.
Well, no, I honestly don't know how or about orders of them being written. I mean, I just read the sequence of the lines in the Bible, and there clearly is 2 versions with respect to the creation story. And one of the things that made theologians start to wonder about the authorship of the Old Testament, particularly the book of Genesis and other books in the Torah, that is the 5 books of Moses. Mm-hmm. The things that made them wonder is, why were the couplets there?
Right.
And why did God have to say more or less the same thing to people twice, and really not be saying the same thing, not be saying precisely the same thing to people on the 2 different occasions? And the conclusion, at least I should say not the conclusion, but the hypothesis that was conjectured was that the Bible, or at least these passages of the Bible, were the result of melding together 2 different versions
Yes.
of the Old Testament, or at least some of the books of the Old Testament, that 2 different groups of allegedly, they call themselves allegedly Jewish, put together. Now, who could those groups have been? And the answer that is suggested is that, according to the Bible, the combined kingdom of Israel that existed under Saul and David and Solomon broke apart around 940 BC, and as a result, there was a northern kingdom that called itself Israel, and a southern kingdom that called itself Judah. And the northern kingdom contained about 10 tribes. The southern kingdom contained the tribes of Judah, part of the tribe of Benjamin, and most of the tribe of Levi. And they more or less went their separate religious way for several centuries, over 2 centuries, until the northern kingdom was swept away and by the Assyrians in about 720 BC. The consequence of the separation also meant that the theologians, or there actually was a clan of Kohanim that went to the north to administer to the religious needs of the north in those centuries. And
I'm sorry, but
Sure.
you were talking about the kingdom of the north being swept away. We're being swept away by time.
Oh, what a tragedy.
So what I would like you to do is, if you wouldn't mind staying over and doing another segment with us, and
I'll be glad to.
kind of pick up where we left off. In the meantime, my guest has been Howard Rothman, who is a professor of biology at
City
University of New York. And we've been discussing hypothesizing who wrote the Bible. I have been your host, Dennis Horowitz. Thanks for watching. See you next week.